Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you a Frankenbob, or a Frankenstein minion. So it is a bob that you are keeping track of which minion's which. So it's got the two goggles on, he's got just black eyes, green complexion, green jacket like Frankenstein, the silver bolts, whole thing is Frankenstein. But then as an added element, his arms raise up so that he can do like the arms out dead walk thing. Really cool. This is actually borrowing from myself because I've done a Frankenstein with the arms that raise like that and a mummy in the past, and I haven't done one for a couple years. And then I saw this Frankenbob decoration that was like a blow-up thing for front yards. I'm like, hey, that would make an adorable nail, and I could definitely make those arm raise because it just adds that Frankenstein-esque like look. I love it. I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well.
So we're going to begin with an overlay of an orange acrylic, starting to just get this really bright orange right in the middle of the nail. And then just to add a little bit more to the background so it's not quite so plain, I'm going to take a darker shade of orange and I'm going to fade it around the outside, making a radial ombre so it's darker around the perimeter of the nail, lighter in the middle. Kind of gives Frankenstein or Frankenbob a back glow, like there's a light behind him and he's going away from it, like there's, I don't know, maybe a fireball behind him and he's slowly trying to do his Frankenstein walk away from it, something along those lines. So just create that really pretty little ombre in the middle. Then I'm going to take some clear acrylic and I'm going to apply that down the entire nail just to make sure it's nice and strong and add an encapsulation. If after you've done the second color in your ombre and it doesn't look very smooth, depending on the colors, you might need to do the first color, the middle color, again, and another layer on top. And if you need to, you can go back and forth with your colors just until you're happy with the way that looks. I'm now going to take a piece of wire and I'm going to string 2 bar beads on it. If you have one bar bead that's longer that does the whole job without having to use 2, you could certainly do that. Mine were just a little too short, so I have the 2 stuck together. And then I'm going to, with the wire still in the middle of them, I'm going to attach this to the nail with some clear acrylic. If you, like me, are using 2 beads instead of just 1, be very careful not to get any acrylic to go through the little gap between them. So try to keep them as tight together so that you don't accidentally get any acrylic on your wire that's underneath, so that the wire keeps its movement. And then after you have that done and you've secured it, if you're using clear acrylic or any kind of acrylic, just make sure it's a little bit drier when you're going up and over the middle. But then take and you can start sculpting your bob once those beads are stuck down. Leave the wire in place, don't take it out, leave that right where it is. And then with a really pale creamy shade of green, start adding the shape of Bob's head. As you are painting, or as you're sculpting your minion and you're doing all of these different layers and colors, you have to be aware that you have to go up over that arm raising mechanism in the middle. You have to go up and over those beads. So your 3D art may have to be slightly bulkier than it would normally be. I do want to mention though that if you go back and you watch my original Frankenstein arm raising video, which like I said I will link down below, or it'll also be at the end of the video and the little easy click watch this next spot. If you watch that video, I did the arms differently, so it was a slightly different technique, a slightly different style. I like this one way better. And so you can kind of get a comparison of, you know, then and now. Plus, because that video is several years old, you can see kind of progression of, you know, how my art has progressed, if you are in any way curious about that too. I always find it really encouraging to see how my art has progressed over the course of whatever spans of time when I have 2 things that are comparable. But I also really like to see how another artist's art progresses over a period of time. If you know, like, you know, oh, wow, this is 2 years apart, or this is 3 months apart, depending on circumstance. When you really put your time in and you focus on improving and practicing and just doing it, the progression is so noticeable. And so if you feel like you are not where you want to be with your art, just take a peek at some before and afters of other people's and really see how they progress, because where you are today may be where somebody else is just dreaming they can someday be able to accomplish. And, you know, everybody starts somewhere. So check out some of those. There's a lot of different inspiration out there on, you know, progression of art and how it changes and how remarkable a little bit of time and a little bit of dedication, how much it can do. So on that little happy note of the day, we're going to keep working on our bob. I am making sure to really cover up all those beads. As I am working near the end of the beads where the wire is coming out, you saw I just kind of moved the wire. I just kind of played with the wire a little bit to make sure that it stays mobile. It doesn't have to be able to slide left to right necessarily, but if you slide it left to right, you can just make sure that it still has some wiggle in it, because when we go to bend the wires later on to make them so that they can raise up and down, They have to be able to move. Otherwise, if they get stuck, then the whole arm raising minion thing is not the case anymore. He's not an arm raising minion. He's a stationary armed minion. So I have 2 colors of green that I'm using, a slightly brighter one and a slightly darker one. I'm using the darker one for his little pants, and I'm using the lighter one, which the difference between them is very small. It is not a big change, but using those two different colors, it really just makes the jacket look like it's on top. However, if you do not have 2 shades of green that are close together like this, or you can, just grab 2 different ones and be like, yeah, this will be an easy way to make these 2 things look different. If you just take a little bit of paint and you highlight the jacket with a little bit of paint later, that would work too. Or you can darken the pants a little bit later, depending on what color green you have for acrylic and what kind of greens you want for your little Frankenstein outfit. I'm going to use the darker shade of green to be adding the lapels on the jacket and the little hem on the top of the pockets. Again, this is one of those, I have 2 shades of green, so I'm going to use them. It is not a necessary thing to have all of these shades of green to do the different things, because between Frank's body and then the pants and then the shirt, there's a lot of different color going on. And, it's not necessarily crucial to have all those different colors of green. I'm going to add the lapel on the other side, try to keep them nice and even. And this is another thing that I just want to mention. When I'm sculpting these lapels, you don't necessarily need to. If you wanted to just paint the little outlines of the lapels. With this particular color combination and this minion, I thought that the sculpting wasn't nearly as important as sometimes. Sometimes those sculpted details they make such a big difference. In this particular circumstance, I didn't necessarily feel that way. And I don't know what the difference was, but as I was sculpting them, I was thinking, yeah, I probably could have just painted these on and it would have been faster. So it's up to you. Not to say that the sculpting doesn't have its extra appeal, but if it just seems like too much for you, you could simplify it a little. Now onto his goggles. I'm going to take black acrylic and I'm going to be sculpting the straps first, and then I'm going to start sculpting the rim of the goggles. I am doing this in a little bit different of a method than I have before. Usually when I've sculpted a goggle for a minion, because I've sculpted many minions in my time, and I can put links to those videos as well. Same thing, you can see progression for sure with the sculpted minions. There's a big variance. Usually I place down a bead of acrylic and then I take a dotting tool and I'll just poke it in the middle and swirl it around, stretch the circle out. That works really well with acrylics that have a little bit more stretch to them. This particular black acrylic, and black acrylic in general to me, doesn't stretch as well. It's a little bit drier feeling just no matter what. And so I knew that it wouldn't work to do one whole side of the goggles and then just, place a larger bead down, stretch it. If you're not doing a green Frankenstein minion and you're doing a regular minion, and say you're sculpting your goggle with a silver or a gray, and you know that it has that really nice stretchy kind of, I can pull it. Hopefully I'm making sense. Different brands of acrylic are also better and worse for this particular texture that I'm trying to describe. But some of them, it's like they don't crack. And you can kind of move them and push them and they don't ever crack. Some of them crack. The black tends to crack just a little bit. It's not that bad, and I did use my dotting tool, but it's one of those things where it just may be easier to do it in sections instead of trying to do the whole thing at once. But again, if you want to see what I'm talking about a little bit easier, those past minion videos, especially if you watch the more recent ones, I would imagine it would show that technique a little bit easier. Otherwise, there are, several minion videos that I've done in the past. We have a minion loving family, so I've sculpted them and taken inspiration from the Despicable Me franchise a few different times. So now that I have most of the body sculpted and it's all hard, so as far as like the jacket is no longer pliable at all, if I can touch it and move it and it's going to be just fine. I bent my arms down at 90-degree angles, and I'm going to cut them off so that the wire isn't too long. At the beginning, make sure you have extra wire just so that you have that opportunity to take some off and you don't have to worry about, oops, now my wires aren't long enough. Better to have a little bit extra than not quite enough. I'm going to take my e-file and a narrow bit, and I'm going to carve the openings of my goggles just a little bit because I thought they just weren't quite as smooth and precise as I usually hope for things. So I just opened those up a little bit. Now with some white acrylic, I'm going to fill in the lower portion of the goggle, not really worrying about the top half of it. If acrylic goes there, I'm not going to take it out, but I'm not going to try to make sure that that area gets filled in all the way. It's kind of a, either way sort of a scenario. And then after I have that done, I'm going to add a second coat to my first eyeball because it wasn't quite as bright of a white as I would hope for. And I'm going to leave those to cure for a moment, and I'm going to squish a nail form backing underneath the wire of the arm, and I'm going to hold it there. You may have to manipulate your nail form backing a couple different times to get it to lay right, and use your fingers underneath it to prop it up. And then after you have that on there, you're going to take your coat color of green, whichever color that may be, and you're going to cover up the wire down to the arms. So leave it, stop it where the wrist would be. And then once you get to that point, you're going to take black acrylic and sculpt the hands. When you are sculpting the minion hand, sculpt the fingers so that they're spread out wide like he's reaching. So we've got the little, so first I did the cuff of the glove, and then I'm going to do like the palm of the hand. And after that's done, I'm going to sculpt the individual little fingers sticking out. After you have done, their first two fingers, you may want to give them just a moment to cure slightly and then do the one in the middle. Depending on how fast your acrylic cures and hardens, you may have to do that or you may not. Keep in mind, if you do have to do that, you cannot move your hand. It's got to stay just how it is so that you don't move your nail form backing. It's probably not very long. If you have a fast setting acrylic, you should probably be able to just keep working. If you have a slower setting acrylic, it may be a minute or two. After you have that, I'm still going to hold it until it's fully cured, but because I can easily see the one eyeball that is closer to that arm, I'm going to be adding the green eyelid with the same color of the light green that I used for the background of, or my minion's skin. I'm going to move the nail form backing, and I'm going to repeat the process for the other arm. Same thing, hold the nail form backing, going to use the green for the sleeve of his coat. Get rid of that extra little bit that was at the end. Sculpt the hand. As you are sculpting this second hand, it is hard to see the hand that was already sculpted underneath it because it's completely hidden from view. So if you are a little unsure of what size the hand was and you just kind of are, it's one of those things where I like to look back and forth between things to make sure that when I'm doing something that's symmetrical, that I have it the same. It can be a little tricky. So one thing for this is if you really pay attention to how big your beads of acrylic were from your first hand to compare to the second hand, just so that you can see like, okay, this is how much acrylic I use, so it's going to be this size. That can be helpful. Not that it's foolproof. It's one of those still like cross your fingers kind of a moments. And as long as the hands are very close, it's fine. If they're not perfect, well, that's okay. You can always, if you carefully, you can probably break the hand off and resculpt it and try to adjust the size a little bit. But just from the beginning, try to really pay attention to how big you're sculpting it so that you don't have to worry about that as much. I'm going to add a little bit more acrylic to the shoulders of my minion, and then flipping the arms upside down, I'm going to add a second coat of acrylic to the bottom of the arms to round them out and to hide the wire because you can still see through the wire on the other side. Don't take this underneath coat of acrylic all the way up to the armpit because that might hinder the movement of the arm. Just try to really cover like the lower section. Add the glove and the fingers. And then once you've got both of them so that there's a nice rounded quality underneath, leave those arms raised for a little while just to make sure that it's completely hardened, cured, done, so that if you accidentally lower the arms too early, it might end up getting it so that the acrylic sticks to itself and then the arms won't raise up again. Most of any of these designs are just precautions to make sure that it doesn't glue itself in one position or the other. Once you are done with that, I'm going to take some metallic silver acrylic and I'm going to be adding the bolts on the side of the head. As you can see, my acrylic pretty much stays really 3D and it stays upright and out away from the body. It doesn't like sink or drip down. If your acrylic does not manipulate that way, whether that be due to the powder that you're using or the liquid that you're using, if it doesn't, you could sculpt these little bolts separately on a nail form backing, and then you could just glue them on and secure them with acrylic. However, it is way easier if your acrylic will do what mine did and just kind of hold its own, just how it was. Once we're done with all of that sculpting, then you can take some acrylic paint and start doing some of the painted details. I thought my background looked like it needed a little something that the bob was running away from, and so I decided to be adding a couple little bats in the background. And plus, I love bats. I love painting the little bat silhouettes with the black acrylic, and I didn't know how many designs this year were going to include the little bats. And since that's one of those nostalgic Halloween classic things for me that I always try to squeeze into a video or two, I figured this was the perfect opportunity, and that orange background was just asking for bats. So for me in particular, I'm going to be adding my favorite little creatures. So I'm just going to do 3 little bat silhouettes. The great thing with bat silhouettes is they can be as simple or as complex as you like. You can add a lot more detail than I did if you wanted to, or you can make them even more basic. It's kind of up to you. I like that in-between cartoon bat mix look is what I usually go for. Then, still using my black acrylic paint, I'm going to start adding the details to my Bob's face. As I am adding these details, the acrylic paint that I'm using is diluted. So I take, and as you can see, I'm mixing it on my thumb. I'll dip my brush into the paint first, and then I will just do a quick dunk into my paint water. And that will give a little tiny bit of water mixed into my paint. And then if it seems like it isn't mixed on the brush, I usually will take and I will do a quick little swipe on my thumb. And that'll help blend the water into the paint. And then it makes it so much easier. All of these thin lines paint a little bit more smoothly. The paint stretches a little further, and it makes it so that you don't have quite as much of that like skipping look. Sometimes when you're painting on top of something that's slightly rough, like sculpted acrylic that doesn't have no base coat or anything on it, the paint will kind of tug. And if you mix just that little bit of water in, it makes it apply much more simply. Then I'm going to apply some gel sealer over the background, over that orange, making sure I don't accidentally get anything on the arms to glue them in place. And then after I have that done, if you want to, you can also apply some of the gel sealer over the eyes. It'll give it more of a glassy look, but I went with matte top coat over the entire Bob, which gives him more of that kind of dead Frankenstein look. So that's an up to you sort of a situation. But here he is so cute. I absolutely love the little raising arm element. It's one of those it makes the Frankenstein. It really does. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well.